Good morning, Temple 6. It is good to see you, and it is good to be seen. Today, we're going to talk about the pandemic. Yes, that's right. We're in the middle of a pandemic, which means we are experiencing a global epidemic affecting every country on earth and exposing every human on earth to a deadly virus. The New York Times reports as of September the 12th, 2020, this pandemic known as COVID-19 has sickened more than 28 million people and taken the lives of over 1 million people worldwide. There is no area on earth that has not been affected. This pandemic, this worldwide epidemic that is causing global turmoil has disrupted the stock market, the workplace, the schoolhouse, and yes, the church house. The stock market seems to have righted itself to ensure that commerce for the rich and wealthy is secure. If you are an essential worker, the workplace is deemed safe for you to enter for those who must work. Whether or not we agree, we are compelled to send our precious children to the schoolhouse. But what of the church house? The state of Tennessee has established the following guidelines. Those who are 65 years or older, people with disabilities, people with serious respiratory or heart conditions, people with compromised immune systems, and children should not gather in person in houses of worship until a later time. Now, it seems as though investing money and reaping the benefits through the stock market is essential. Reporting to work as grocery workers, transit employees, and healthcare workers, that's essential. Attending school as a teacher and a student is considered essential. But my question to you today is worship essential? Well, as a God lover, I declare worship is essential. If worship is essential, where and how should we worship in this pandemic? The answer to this can be found in the Gospel of John, the 4th chapter, verses 20 through 24. Jesus is in the middle of a robust theological conversation with a woman from Samaria. They have discussed many topics while sitting and standing around in the heat of the day at Jacob's well. But suddenly she turns her conversation to worship and says to Jesus, Jesus, our ancestors worshiped on the mountain, but you and your people say we need to go to Jerusalem to worship. Jesus says to her, believe me, woman, the time is coming when you and your people will worship the Father neither on the mountain nor in Jerusalem. But the time is coming, and it is here now, when true worshipers will worship in spirit and in truth. The Father looks for those who worship this way. God is spirit, and it is necessary to worship God in spirit and truth. This is a transformational statement. You must be transformed into spirit and truth, which is the image of God, in order to worship. I read this just as the pandemic was developing and the churches had closed. I shouted, worship must go on because worshipers are essential. Because the scripture says that worship cannot be stopped. The places where we worship may disappear, but the act of worship must go on and will go on. It might look different. It might be in a different place. It might be with different people. But worship, the gathering of God's people to give God praise and adoration and to do radical justice work, will go on. Yes, it will go on, but it must look a certain way. must take on the characteristics of God, which is spirit and truth. Jesus makes it clear to the Samaritan woman that a time is coming when folk will not be able to get to the mountain or get to Jerusalem. But that does not mean that worship will stop. Jesus says that the time is coming when you and your people will worship the Father neither on the mountain or in Jerusalem. Now, we do not know what time Jesus is referring to, but we can hear distinctly that worship is not bound, tied, or designated to any given place. God is looking for worshipers, and the qualifications are to worship in spirit and truth, and this can be done in any location. I hear Jesus saying worshipers are essential. I am an essential worshiper, and you cannot stop me. You are an essential worshiper. Can you be stopped? If it's on the hill, worship in spirit and truth. If it is down in the valley, worship in spirit and truth. If it's in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, worship in spirit and truth. The time is here now. True worshipers, essential worshipers, will not give up worship because they cannot get to their churches. True worshipers take on the characteristics of God, and that is the manifestation of the worship which is spirit and truth in any place and anywhere. The Samaritan woman makes it clear as she talks with Jesus that being a Samaritan or a Jew through ethnicity or location determines where worship takes place. She says that Samaritans will worship on the mountain and the Jews will worship in Jerusalem. But Jesus counters this by saying, "Believe me, woman, the time is coming when you and your people will worship the Father neither on the mountain nor in Jerusalem. It does not matter if you are a Jew or a Samaritan." God is looking for essential worshipers. God is not looking at the place where worship is held. God is looking for the quality of worship, which is the embodiment of God's self, which is spirit and truth. Are we willing to accept each other as we are, male or female, old or young, black or white? Jesus is preparing the Samaritan woman for the job of reconciliation and transformation among her people, regardless of ethnicity, location, heritage, tradition, or gender. This is what worship does. Worship transforms people and brings people together. She will deliver the good news to her community, and because of her, Jews and Samaritans will become one as God worshipers. Jesus says the time has come to put aside the things that divide groups and come together as models of godly love. Ethnicity and gender should not be used to divide us. The spirit and truth of God should bind us together. Just as there were divisions in Samaria, there are also divisions in America among Christians. Look, the streets are full of protesters and protests, asking for justice for a variety of reasons and causes. People are also using the streets to distribute food and other items to those in need. Is this what God means by worshiping in spirit and truth? Is this the assembly of worshipers that looks for God's justice? Is this the reconciliation that God desires? As our people struggle against the many atrocities facing Black people, from racist discrimination to needless death, we hear freedom fighters demand that justice roll down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Worship is also radical defiance over unrighteous injustice. So from Facebook to the streets, we hear the cries of Black Lives Matter. We hear pleas across the country for the removal of racist flags and statues that perpetuate fear and terror in the hearts and souls of Black America. We also hear the cries of those without jobs and who will soon be evicted from their homes, regardless of race, creed, and color. All are God's people and are deserving of God's mercy and love. Worshipers are the deliverers of God's mercy and love. That is the meaning of worshiping in spirit and truth. Who knows but this is a time of God preparing our hearts to accept God's spirit and to understand God's truth so we can learn to treat each other better, so that we can reconcile our differences and become a better nation. The day will come when we indeed will return to our respective houses of worship. Will we be different, or will we return to our self-righteous ways? When that day comes and we return to the church house, we ought to be fully and radically transformed to justice-seeking, God-loving worshipers, worshiping in spirit and truth. Why? Because we are essential worshipers and God is depending on us to do God's work of spirit and truth.